Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
You've had a long day. You're tired, and all you want to do is sit on the couch and veg out watching something mindless on television. Then, from the other room, you hear your spouse ask if you could please start bath time as your spouse is finishing up a work project. And you don't really want to, but you neither want to disappoint your spouse nor get into an argument about it. You could just go ahead and do what you were asked, but you're also trying to honor your own feelings. So you're stuck. What you do next is truly important to your marriage. And that's what I'm talking about today with my guests, clinical social worker, Dr. Asha L. Romanelli, and his wife, certified coach, Galit Romanelli. So thanks so much for coming on the show and talking about what is a really, really common thing that goes on in marriages. You wrote a piece for the Good Men Project titled, "It's Not That Important to Me." You say that most of us prefer to sugarcoat communication in order to not rock the boat. Why does this happen, and what makes it a drawback?
Wow, that's a great question. So I would say like this: all of us, we don't want to get hurt, and we don't want to offend, and we don't want to kind of step into fights and arguments. So what we do is we call this fuzzy communicating or fuzzy bidding. And we basically, instead of saying our truth in a clear and blunt way, we kind of sugarcoat it and we say, it's complicated, I'm not really sure, I'll get back to you. And what happens is this vague communication, or we call this smokescreen communication, ends up with a lot of energy being spent trying to mind read, trying to read between the lines. What does my partner mean? And then I start analyzing every single word they say. And then so much energy is just going into the mind reading that it's exhausting. Mm-hmm. It's exhausting, and couples end up either communicating less or being constantly insulted or misinterpreting the partner. Because what happens is, especially when you're in tense relationships, you tend to what's called negative sentiment override.
Right.
Which basically means I automatically interpret my partner negatively.
Yep.
So that vague communication oftentimes ends up in negative sentiment override, which just hurts relationships more.
Well, and I love you're talking about this idea that we don't actually always say what we mean. And gosh, I wish I could remember. I always forget her name, and I really shouldn't. But she's a professor in New York, and she studies linguistics and communication. And, it's one of her books, she talks about the couple that goes out for dinner, and the guy has, he's got health issues. He's got high blood pressure. He's got high cholesterol. And she points out, honey, there's salmon on the menu. As he's ordering a steak, right? It's that she basically doesn't want him to order a steak, but instead of saying, I really think you shouldn't eat so much red meat, which of course would be a difficult conversation, she just points out, oh, do you see they have this? And then of course, when he doesn't order the salmon, it's this whole kind of thing,
or even more than that, Leslie, right? The clear communication, I think, would even be, I'm worried about you. Mm-hmm. That would even be more direct and more clear. That would be the vulnerable option, right?
Well, yeah. And it's this interesting way of, and again, I know I think in the article you mentioned it, that women tend to be less direct, that it's like, oh, did you see that such and such is playing at the theater, right? Meaning I would like to go see this movie, as opposed to just saying to my partner, hey, on Saturday when we're on our date, can we go see the new movie at the thing, as opposed to just this kind of generic, oh, there's this thing out there. It's like, what is that?
So that's called, yeah. So if you use that, the fuzzy bidding is basically what the Gottmans talk about, emotional bids. Mm-hmm. So instead of telling my partner I miss you or I love you because I don't want to get hurt, so I'm going to cover it up with a logistical or concrete question like, oh, there's an interesting movie out. Because we all want to protect ourselves, especially if our relationship's a bit tense or a bit rocky.
But
that
Isn't that sort of how our relationships get tense and rocky? I mean, you talked about this mind reading where, where I'm supposed to try to figure out, what it is my partner's saying. And I do personally know that men generally as a whole, that's not individual, but as a whole tend to be much more direct in their conversation, and women tend to be less direct. And I think that creates a lot of room for misunderstanding, miscommunication, just all over the place, right?
I have to chime in as kind of a doctoral student, a gender studies doctoral student, and say that I think it's interesting kind of what you're saying, Leslie, in terms of men speaking more directly. I think what happens often in relationships is that men may speak more directly, but not about their inner world.
Correct.
And so that's where the kind of communication happens, right? That's where we become misaligned in terms of expectations, desires, wants. And I think that that's where, when we can each learn to speak more directly and openly, like Asel suggested in his article about, being very blunt and clear about, this just isn't that important to me, right? Like cleaning the sink after I, had a long day just isn't that important to me. And then that allows, and as kind of blunt and maybe even rude or offensive, or, how can that be? Doesn't he care about, the cleanliness of our home? It allows me to position myself against that, right? In a very clear way, rather than just continuously be disappointed or frustrated or angry or like, no, he's not going to care as much about this particular thing as I do. Now, how do I position myself?
Right. And that was, that was one of the things that caught me about this article, is that when you get caught in this bind about what it is I want to do versus what it is somebody's asking me to do, my partner, you say that the answer to this double bind, lose-lose situation is that sentence that you just used, Galit. It's not that important to me. So what exactly does this sentence mean, and what makes it work?
So part of our approach, we have a whole model for relationships, which maybe we'll talk about in a different episode. But one of the pillars of our approach is called say the thing. Say the thing comes from the world of improv, of theater improvisation, which basically means when I'm improvising a scene, you want to say what's happening right now on stage, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's part of the magic of improv. So when we take this into relationships, we're basically trying to encourage couples. We teach couples in the clinic every single day to do clear, one-dimensional communication, which basically it's a high risk, high gain, right? Because if I'm going to say to you, okay, it's not that important for me, we might have a rupture, right? We might have a misunderstanding, even an argument. But the gain is that we save all this energy. This is what keeps relationships alive, right? Because when we sugarcoat it, this vagueness kind of just strips all the energy out. It drains us. So the beautiful sentence of it's not that important for you. Notice. So here's what I'm saying. Let's break this down. So first of all, it's not that important. It doesn't mean it's not important at all. For me right now, I'm prioritizing other things, which means I'm telling you my truth, and I'm saying it's not important to me. I'm not saying it's not important, period. Okay, washing the dishes is not important at all. I'm saying for me right now, it's not that important. And I want to give an example, if that's okay, from the clinic from this week. So
wait, and I just also want to add, Asel, to what you're saying, because I think it's another component of our model is own your shit, right? Which is being able to share the things that generally we don't share, right? And I think that saying it's just not that important to me is a very kind of is really nestled in kind of owning our shit and being open and honest with things that in general we may feel embarrassed or ashamed to admit.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's own your shit and say the thing, okay? And and I want to give you an example, okay? So this week it's my second session with the couple. I'm just going to say it very bluntly. They have a very bland marriage. They barely have any sex. And the woman was talking about she wasn't really sure if she wants to come back, because the truth is she's okay because most of her libido is outsourced out of the marriage. So then I said to her, so basically what you're saying is right now you're not looking to work on your sex life. It's just like the truth is not. I'm reading erotic novels. and I touch myself here and there and I'm happy. So then I said to her, so, instead of feeling guilty, why don't you turn to your husband and say to him, it's not that important to me to work on our sex life.
Yeah.
And she took a breath and she looked at him and she just said to him point blank, she said, it's not that important to me to work on our sex life. And there was a moment there. Now he laughed. Why did he laugh? Because he felt it intuitively anyways. So what she did there, she said the thing, she came out with her truth while still respecting that it's for her. She knows that for him, he wants more sex. That the way to go out of lose-lose, it's called differentiation. Differentiation is my ability to be myself and to be connected to you.
Right.
And notice this sentence does not mean I'm sounding like, why is that important to you? I can't believe it. No, it's just not that important to me. I'm owning my shit. And I'm also prioritizing myself without erasing you. It's seeing me and seeing you at the same time.
Interesting.
And I think also it's really important to say, because it's just not that important to me. It's not forever, right? But it's right now. And then, like I mentioned before, it allows the partner to position himself. Okay, now with that information, now what do I want to do with my libido or with my, right? Like then it's much easier to position yourself in then you can have a real open, honest conversation about where that leaves you.
But isn't that the reason why people don't do it, is because now it's one thing to say, cleaning the sink isn't that important to me. But to say working on our sex life isn't that important to me. I mean, that we're talking about a difference in quite a bit of difference in degree of importance.
It's a zinger. You brought a zinger.
Leslie, but let's open that up, okay? Because here's the truth: your partner intuitively feels all this, right? Because you're sugarcoating and avoiding it, that just creates more damage. And was it Brene Brown who said, "Clear is kind"?
Yes.
Right. Clear is kind. I said that's being generous. Let him know where he stands, so he can make a choice. And you want to come out. You want, like Terry Real says, the best way to keep passion alive is to tell the truth. Yeah. So she's going to say that. That's going to raise the temperature, also in a good way, because suddenly there's clarity. Suddenly there's something to push against. Suddenly there's action. Suddenly there's aliveness. There's a vitality. And I think a lot of the couples we see, and I'm sure you see this as well, Leslie, they're bored. They're bored and they're completely outsourced. There's no libido left in the system.
Right. And there's multiple reasons for that. And that's a whole different show. Right.
There's tons of topics we could talk about today. Yeah.
Right.
True.
So I just want to remind people that this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm having a conversation about expectations and communication in relationships with clinical social worker, Dr. Asha L. Romanelli, and his wife, certified coach Galit Romanelli. And the truth is that you and your partner have different expectations and different priorities. This is normal, and it only becomes a problem when one or both of you fight against it. And the answer is to learn to not just accept, but actually appreciate these differences. And I personally believe this is what makes relationships, and marriage in particular, so challenging. And if this is a struggle for you, either accepting your partner's differences or they're accepting your differences, there is an answer. And if you're ready to find out how to navigate these differences successfully, I invite you to schedule your free, no obligation 5-star relationship strategy session. You can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Or by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And now I want to get back to this really good conversation. So how can a couple or even an individual part of the relationship begin to use this sentence, "It's not that important to me," effectively?
Well, it starts with the core of our model, which is called play. You need to have play in your relationship. And we can do a whole episode on play, but I'm sure play is the lubricant of life, play is the lubricant of relationships. Without play, everything's just going to be rough. So there needs to be a softness. Now, play, when we say play, we mean a softness, a soft perception of myself, of my partner, of the relationship. So first, we need to have a soft relationship where I can say the sentence. It's not like, "It's not that important to me." Like, it's not aggressive or angry. It's like a playful. It's owning your shit playfully. And if you do this enough and you have this culture, obviously tell your partner to listen to this podcast or read the article as well.
Right.
So once we know, it's clear as kind. So it's actually being generous and saying, and just owning my shit and saying to Galit, like, listen, making the bed, here's a real example, okay? Making the bed in the morning, let's make this real. Let's raise temperature. Galit knows that making the bed in the morning, it's not that important for me. I don't care. I really don't care. I'll do it if she insists, but it's not that important to me. So I rather just own it, and then we create a culture where your faults are welcome. If you do this right, over time, when your partner comes out saying this sentence and other shit that they're going to own, you thank them, you smile, you give them a kiss and a hug. Galit, take it away from here.
But I think the important thing to recognize is that it's not the end of the conversation. It's actually just the start, which is part of play, right? Play is finding alternatives, finding solutions, expanding options. And so it's just not important to me. Doesn't mean, and that's it, the conversation is over. But it's an opportunity to begin to explore collaborative options. Okay. And I want to go back to the sex one, because I think that you're right. Like talking about the bed. Okay, fine. You know, that's not nearly as big as sex, but okay. So it's not that important to you, and your libido is at the moment focused outwardly. And where does that leave me? And what can we do together so that I'm also, you know, satisfied sexually? What can we, and that is the beauty, right? Is that it starts the conversation for a really meaningful, vulnerable conversation that's honest.
Well, and I love you bringing that up, because it really is. I mean, and I do think that's what gets in the way a lot of times, is because, and I think, Asael, I think you said this earlier about, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And, you know, but again, by not telling our truth, we are hurting them, because they're stumbling and bumbling around in the dark, not understanding why what they're doing is being received the way it's being received. Because it's like you said, I mean, it all that tension is there. We just don't necessarily understand what it's about. And that's where I think being open and honest, but that kind of open and honesty is scary.
It's very scary. But I think that the story that we make up in our mind, sorry, I said, I'll let you go in a minute. But I think the story that we make up in our mind is often much worse than the reality. And so if we are willing to be vulnerable, then we'll get clarity, which will then actually show us, oh, it's not that she's not interested in me. She's not interested in sex at the moment here, but do you know what I mean? And somehow then having that conversation allows you to open it up, and rather than kind of create these stories in your mind. Okay.
So I want to add to that and basically say the opposite of owning your shit is gaslighting. So let's name it. So she's avoiding having sex. She's gaslighting. Oh, it's important for me, but I have a headache. It's important. Right. So that's gaslighting. Okay. Gaslighting is never going to help your relationship. Right? So the antidote for gaslighting is to own your shit. So it's not that important for me. It's one variation of owning your shit. So yes, it's really painful and it hurts, but at least that's clarity, that's generous, that's being transparent. And from there, we had an honest conversation. So what's worse, saying something that's uncomfortable and hurting your partner, which by the way is inevitable. Right. Because love and hate are the same and they're connected, and you always hurt the one you love, right? Or gaslighting your partner who feels like something's wrong, but you keep denying it.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because you're talking about making the bed and whatever. These are the kinds of conversations, and I call them negotiations. I don't use the word compromise in terms of a relationship, because I think that's a dangerous word. But negotiating to an agreement that something doesn't matter that much to me, but I recognize it matters a lot to you. So am I willing to participate on some level in what's important to you, whether it's the dishes in the sink or the bed being made or having sex? I mean, I would assume that part of that is at play. Yes.
So there's a concept called high desire and low desire partner. This comes from the work of David Schnarch. In every single department, there's a high desire and low desire for sex, for cleaning, for traveling, for praying, Okay, so the idea is once I'm owning my shit and I say it's something important to me, the high desire partner in this case would be Galita for making the bed, or the husband in the couple I mentioned. Then they're going to have to make a decision. Is this important enough for me that I'm going to lead this, that I'm going to plow through, or am I going to have to find a different solution? So I think it's owning it. Like for a lot of couples, they're afraid to even own it. Like they're afraid to even say, "I'm not like you. I have a different priority," especially after many years. And maybe once praying was super important to me and 20 years later it's not. And maybe sex was super important to me, but now after 4 kids and I'm doing my PhD, I'm less interested right now in sex. Like for partners, it's coming out because we will all be married more than once. The question will be with the same partner because we're always changing, and couples are afraid to own their shit and say, I've evolved, I've changed, my priorities have changed. Will you still love me?
And I hear that, and that's actually the risk. And you guys see these couples, I see these couples when they haven't been dealing with these changes over time. Because at our core, I think we stay fairly the same, but I think our everyday desires or whatever may change. And so to be held, well, but you did this 20 years ago. It's like, yeah, I did a lot of things 20 years ago that I don't do now. This idea of staying in that connection and staying in that ability to talk about what matters, I think is critical. And I guess that's my question of how do you encourage couples to do that?
Do it. Take the plunge. I also want to say, we're talking here about big spans of 20 years, but it could also change from week to week, from month to month. And when you communicate openly, then, and especially, with the mindset of play, then it's all flexible and it can all change and change, and that's what keeps us interesting and curious. And that is actually what keeps the passion alive, is that I don't assume to know how a sailor will respond, even though we've been together for, over a decade, because I recognize that his mood changes, his priorities change, and these things change so it fluidly. And so it kind of almost, keeps boredom at bay and being taken for granted at bay. And I think that those are all assets to have in your relationship.
And I want to piggyback that 1 second, Leslie. And I think another thing that, as you were speaking, I was thinking, Leslie, what we're basically talking about is integrity, right? It's about owning your shit is integrity. Like, and I think, if we talk about boredom and people are like, well, I've known this woman for 20 years, like by owning your shit, by saying it's not important to you, by being in your integrity, you're honoring your evolving nature. And the second you realize, whoa, my wife is evolving, and I can say that I'm in my 3rd marriage to my first wife, Galit, because she has changed and I have changed in the last 13 years. Okay. And I think once couples understand that, internalize that. So how do we help them? First of all, we model them. We model it by both of us being in the room and sharing real stories about our life, like spritzing a lot of play in the clinic, in the room, so they feel like they're not going to be judged. And by the way, when that woman said, sex is not that important for me right now, all 3 of us laughed. Why? Because there was like this release of energy. It was like, finally, we can finally come out. And I purposely use the word coming out because there's like so much shame when you're bottling up. And the second you say it, they're like, that's it.
Right.
It's not as big a deal as you think, because your partner already knows. They know it. So just own it.
Well, so talk a little bit more about the role of play, because I think that can be misunderstood as what does that mean? Because I know that some people use humor and teasing and that kind of thing as a way of distancing, of actually not becoming vulnerable. It's like, I'm going to make light of a comment that somebody makes. So talk more about play. I'm curious about that.
So first of all, I think it's really important to differentiate a playful mindset from hostile humor, which is more cynical and sarcasm and putting down, belittling, dismissing, right? Kind of like that kind of, which is, I think, much more aggressive and hostile, masked as humor. And play is really, the way we see it, is a soft perception of reality that allows a flexibility of mind, that allows innovation. And I think that the easiest access point to get to that type of play is curiosity, right? Staying really open and curious and not taking ourselves too seriously along the way, right? And recognizing that our flaws are welcome. And if we can embrace them first and foremost, then there will be space for them.
Play is a whole philosophy, and I think we can dedicate a whole episode just talk about play. But I think the rebranding we want to do here, play is not children's work. Play is serious work.
Yeah.
By the way, that's our mother tongue. We're all born speaking play. And we, in fact, as we grow older, a lot of us lose access to play, lose access to that playfulness, that what we call potential state, the state between reality and fantasy. And couples the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. And couples that are not playful, they don't have that. They don't have elbow room. They don't have wiggle room to make mistakes. They don't have that playground. And that's why when you don't have any play, every sentence lands hard. Every jab, every moment is like, every rupture is like a drama. Play is what allows us to kind of smooth things over. It gives us a little bit of a good eye, a little more space.
So how can people either maintain play or incorporate play? Because a lot of what, as you guys are talking, what keeps popping into my head is emotional intelligence. It's like, which we all know is essential for healthy, lasting relationships, but but it's not necessarily something that we're either encouraged or taught, or
It's true.
I'm not quite sure where, but how do we help people do this?
First, it's a willingness, right? To surrender to the journey and the mindset. Because when we are in a mindset of play, we're willing to let go of the game mentality, which is kind of winners, losers. These are the rules, and a very kind of binary, rigid way of thinking. So I think it's first being willing to be a little bit more flexible, recognizing that our one of our mottos is there are no mistakes, only learning, right? And that actually the journey is a huge part, and we want to enjoy the journey. And play can be in like really small things, right? Like one of the things that we teach couples is to do a take two, right? And to name it as a take two, right? So in movies and films, actors have so many options to do a redo, right? The scene didn't go well, they can do a take two. So even just incorporating, let's do a take two. I didn't like the way I answered you, Asael, or I'm sorry that I missed, your bid, or I said the wrong thing, or, even if it's a few days later, I can come back and I can say, let's do a take two on that conversation that we had. And even that's kind of a small thing that's playful, that says, we can always have a do-over. So there are small things that we can incorporate into our relationship that kind of soften the edges. And I think that that's what play does. It doesn't say there are no rules, but it says, let's move around in a more flexible way. Let's soften those edges.
So what helps people become more flexible? Because I do hear you, and it's funny because as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about something that, it's an expression that my husband and I use all the time, because he'll tell me, he goes, oh, well, did I tell you I have dinner with blah, blah, blah on Tuesday? I said, no, you must have told your other wife because you forgot to tell this one. I mean, it's like, it's like, no, it's like, because he goes, well, I'm sure I told you. I said, no, you told your other wife. And that's just kind of our, and it's usually not a big deal. It doesn't really matter, but that's just kind of our playful way of dealing with that, and
yeah.
And the other one is that, I live as a fun sucker. It's like, that's right. Mom takes all the fun out of everything, but it is, I mean, humor is very helpful. And as you said, it's not mean humor. It's actual, let's lighten the mood. It's not that big of, of a deal, but a lot of us become less flexible instead of more flexible. So how is, especially if we've been with somebody for a long time, right? It's like,
Yes.
well, I've been with this person for, in my particular case, almost 40 years with my husband. And it's like, but there's still things that like, I look at him going, who are you? He's like, where did this come from? This is new. And it doesn't necessarily bother me. It's more like, oh, this is interesting. This is surprising. Okay, tell me more. But for a lot of people, they just assume, there's that very dangerous word, that because I've been with somebody for a long time, I know what they're thinking, I know what they want, or worse, they think I should know that because they want me to participate in the mind reading school of relationships. How do we help people develop that flexibility and or keep that flexibility?
Well, I think what you're describing, we call this exclamation marks. You want to turn the exclamation marks into question marks. You want to soften that line. Mm-hmm. Now, the really question is the motivation, right? Because many people don't want to be more playful. Because they don't even know they're missing it.
Right.
Play, who says that? Stuart Brown, really, that says plays like oxygen. You only realize it when it's gone.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't even know they're not playful. They just think that's what it is because they grew up with their model. Their parents was the ball and chain.
Right.
Right. Think about it. There were also our parents' generation. A lot of them were working really hard. There was no play. Play is the privilege of the living. When you're in survival mode, you can't be playful. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, especially men, let's talk about that as well. A lot of us are in survival mode because we've stopped playing long time ago. Mm-hmm. And we were working 9 to 5, like everything's a burden, everything's a chore. So it's really hard to stay playful. So a lot of our work is just to help people see, hey, are you playful?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love it. That's one of the reasons why I hate using, when people talk about marriage or relationships being work, it's like, oh, please stop about. It's like, no, that sounds so horrible. It's like, yeah, let's go work at our relationship. That sounds like a lot of fun. And as opposed to what I hear you say is like, let's get curious about what's possible.
Yeah. I think curiosity. Sorry.
Right. No, go on, Billy.
No, I think curiosity is really if we've lost access to play, which many of us have, then I think that the access point or the entry point back to it is through curiosity, right? And assume nothing. Your partner has changed. Every day your partner changed, just like every day you have different experiences that potentially shape and change you. And I think that when we recognize that, right? And we don't assume that we know what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and ask, then we're cultivating a relationship that is based on curiosity rather than assumptions. And like I said, boredom.
So what do we do? What does somebody do when they get an answer that they don't like or is really, really painful? How do people stay present?
The first thing they need to do is let it land. Let that feedback burn their body and just let it take a big inhale and then just come out and just say the thing. Say, wow, what you just said now is really hard for me to digest. There's a part of me just wants to get up and run or get defensive or attack you, but I'm trying not to do that because I'm realizing that you're speaking your truth. See, playful is also broadcasting live. Play does not necessarily mean you have to be silly. But it means I'm gonna own my shit. And the second I'm saying all of this, Leslie, there's a part of me that's observing that, which means I'm not just angry. There's also a part of me that's observing that anger. So it's also play also helps me regulate between my upstairs brain and my downstairs brain. It helps me regulate between my right brain and my left brain, between being too rigid in my thoughts or too emotional. Play is what keeps everything flowing. It's actually a regulating mechanism.
Right. Because you can't play when you're in trauma mind.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
And how do you know animals are healthy, Leslie? They play. Animals are not healthy, don't play. It's true.
Yeah, that's actually very true. They don't. And so I think that's.
So how do you know marriage? How do you know marriage has problems? There's no play. You've lost play.
Right.
There's no play. Well, you don't even notice it because
Yeah, that is such a profound statement, and I think it's a perfect place to end because it's like that's a mic drop as far as I'm concerned. It's like okay, because you've kind of just changed the way I'm going to be talking to couples. It's like how much fun do you have? And if the answer is not much, it's like okay, we got a problem here. because it's, your life is already serious enough.
Yeah.
And
your relationship should be a playground. That when we teach couples about a kind of a new way to approach their relationship, we talk about our relationship as being a playground. And on the playground, when you watch kids play in the playground, it's not all fun and games. There's negotiation, like you said, there's conflict, there's expectation management, and alongside that, there's also, great friendship and love and affection, but there's all of it. And that's where we learn how to interact and engage. And there's no reason that learning should ever stop. We should always continue to learn and develop and self-growth, and our relationship, our marriage is the playground for us to do that.
Well, and
I'll just say
go ahead.
Well, I'll dovetail that. I think as therapists, like the first thing we'll do is play. Like, I can't teach you communication skill. I can't teach you conflict management if there's no play. Because that's our way of going up on the balcony and looking at ourselves and even laughing at ourselves and being empathic to our shit. So all the places where we're idiots, where we're fools, where we're little children, and just embracing that requires play and soft eyes. We call it soft eyes, soft, good eyes. So you're right. Like, it's really about that. And one last thing I want to say, it's about modeling. I mean, when couples come into the clinic, we do webinars where we teach couples. It's called Playground. We teach couples how to be more playful, and we model that by not taking ourselves too seriously. Even in this podcast, right? We're talking about our own marriage. We're laughing at ourselves. We're modeling that it's okay. It is okay.
I love that. So where can people learn more about you, your modeling, your webinars, anything and where can they learn more?
So all our stuff is in our website. That's called Potential State, www.potentialstate.com. We also have a YouTube channel. It's called the Potential State YouTube channel with over 125 videos. Each one's about 8 minutes, detailing every one of these topics. We have to talk about play, about own your shit, let it land, etc. And you can also find us in the podcast, which is the audio version of the YouTube channel. It's called the Potential State Podcast. So all these three things, and we'll also have hopefully the details in the episode link.
Yes.
Delete, did I forget anything else? We have the podcast YouTube channel. There's also a Facebook page, the Potential State. Basically, the Potential State.
The Potential State. I love it.
And one last place. There's a blog as well on Psychology Today called The Other Side of Relationships. It also appears. It's also syndicated in the Good Men Project. That's where we met, Leslie. So also check out Psychology Today. It's all, but our home base is the potentialstate.com.
I love it. So, expecting your partner to think, act, and prioritize like you is what will lead to problems in your relationship. Communicating calmly and clearly about what you want and don't want is a key to relationship success. And as you've learned through this conversation, play is an important part too. And the sooner you learn to do these things, the faster you will create your real happily ever after. So hopefully you've learned a lot from the show. I certainly have today. And until next week, stay loving.